Chapter 12. We have finished chapter 11, and while we could have spent even more time on those last couple of verses, we do need to move forward. The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life. He that winneth souls is wise. A focus that indeed extends to the idea of evangelism, but that verse is more about influence than anything else. It's not just evangelism. Proverbs 11:30. It's influence. He that winneth souls is wise. Let me say this for every Christian to hear. If I don't know the difference between manipulation and influence, then I don't know the difference between Jesus and Satan. Jesus influences. Satan manipulates. And if I have to use manipulation tactics to convince people to do what I want them to do, instead of meeting them where they are, speaking to them on a even plane, then I'm not taking the approach that he did. He didn't shout from heaven, "Straighten up, be baptized, and you can come up here when you die." He came down. He was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin, so as to live a life that would influence man to follow after him. He that winneth souls is wise. Winning souls. We're not just talking about evangelism, we're talking about how we influence people. If my tactic for influencing people is to hold something over a person's head, if my tactic for influencing people is to manipulate and cajole, to use emotional turmoil rather than even-headedness, patience, and logic, then I'm not using the methods of the Lord. Proverbs 11:31, "Behold, the righteous shall be recompensed in the earth, much more the wicked and the sinner." The idea of there's a reward not only in the next life, but in this life in serving the Lord. Now that, again, we've hit on it multiple times. That doesn't mean that we're promised physical wealth. That doesn't mean that we're promised that we'll never face sickness. But there is indeed a reward in this life for service to the Lord. That reward does not always include technology being friendly to you. I think that almost there is a lie. Let's back out of this and give this one more shot. Yeah, that's thinking about it too. Well, if nothing else, you'll get to look at a gray screen tonight while we move through the first few verses of Proverbs 12. Proverbs 12 is one of those chapters that's very difficult to outline in a sequential manner, verse after verse. There are different ways to overview it, to take it apart. There are key themes that arise repeatedly. And there are series of verses that hit on similar ideas, but simply to outline it verse by verse is a challenge. What we want to do is notice four principles that are laid out in the first four verses, and note how those principles so often reappear throughout this chapter. We won't be able to cover the entirety of the chapter tonight, but we'll start with verse 1. "Whoso loveth instruction loveth knowledge, but he that hateth reproof is brutish." Anyone have the English Standard Version? Do you realize that you can't preach the English Standard Version in churches today? You can't. Because I've been told I can't say stupid from the pulpit, but the English Standard Version says, "He that hates reproof is stupid." See? So the English Standard Version can't be used. Or maybe sometimes we need to be a little less touchy and a little bit more open to the point being made. The idea of brutish or stupid as conveyed here is nonsensible, not rational, not reasonable, thinking more like a brute beast and like a man made in the image of God. "He that loveth instruction," the word translated instruction is in other translations rendered discipline. It's the idea of learning. "He that loves learning loves knowledge, but he that hates reproof hates reproof." The idea of reproof being correction And correction involves that I have to admit that I'm what? Can we say it? I might be wrong. Hey, how about that? It finally caught up with us. I might be wrong. Those are words that are too foreign to too many pairs of lips. I might be wrong. He that loves instruction loves knowledge. The lover of instruction realizes that he doesn't know it all. This harkens all the way back to Proverbs 1:5. A wise man will hear, will increase learning. A man of understanding shall attain to wise counsels. Compare it with Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Once again, here's this idea of, am I willing to learn? We're going to describe Proverbs 12:1 as the idea of pillars of responsibility. This particular pillar is intellectual responsibility. Or we'll call this chapter 4 pillars of duty. And we'll see how these different pillars recur, sometimes multiple pillars in the same verse throughout the chapter. Intellectual responsibility. I have a responsibility to acknowledge that there's more to learn, that I don't know it all. Now, that being said, will anything that I learn tomorrow take away from the simple fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4? 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. That's the bottom line. And anything that I learn is going to be built upon top of that. Now, it may help inform a better understanding of how that truth of 2 plus 2 equals 4 can be applied, but it's not going to contradict or change that truth. Is anything that I learn tomorrow going to change the fact that Jesus is Lord? It's a fact. It's a fact that has been demonstrated by the evidence that He supplied. Now, anything that I learn tomorrow might help me be better informed about all the ins and outs of that truth. There's more to learn. But that doesn't mean that the fundamentals that I can know from Scripture are going to change. There's more to learn, and what we learn can be built upon what we already know, provided that what we already know is in fact based on evidence, based on fact, based on a reasonable approach to drawing conclusions. So, whoso loveth instruction loves knowledge, but he that hates reproof is brutish. The ones that don't like to learn put themselves on an animalistic level. Moving forward, verse 2, let's talk about moral responsibility. A good man obtaineth favor of the Lord. There's a reward for the good man, the one who's focused on that which is right and true. A good man obtaineth favor of the Lord, but a man of wicked devices will he condemn. Contrast between goodness and wickedness here. But the word translated wicked devices is actually one word. And this word is used earlier in the book of Proverbs. As a matter of fact, the first time it's utilized, it's in Proverbs 1:4. To give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. Well, in Proverbs 1:4, the word translated wicked devices. In 12:2 is translated discretion here. The point is this. Depending on the context, the word thus translated can have a positive meaning or a negative meaning. Discretion, it's the idea of looking ahead, planning ahead, being able to look at a situation and take steps to bring about a desired outcome based upon influence, based upon wise choices. Wicked devices, it's the ability to look ahead, to plan ahead, to survey a situation and to bring about a desired outcome that is contrary to the will of God, but perfectly in line with what I want, and I will use manipulation and any other tactic that I need in order to bring about that desired outcome. The same word, it depends on how we're using it. So, the idea here, a good man obtaineth favor of the Lord. I have a moral responsibility to live after a certain manner, and there's a reward for that. Obtaineth favor of the Lord. What's that mean, to obtain favor of the Lord? If we keep it in Old Testament terms, generally speaking, that idea of having favor of the Lord was often connected to the blessings that would ensue. But if we really step back and think about it from a broader standpoint, to have favor of the Lord does not always guarantee that every moment's going to be filled with blessings and free of difficulty. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. He was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. And what did God have to say about Job? Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in all the earth. He fears God and he eschews evil. That's how God described Job when he spoke with Satan. The point being this: Job had favor of the Lord. Did Job's favor of the Lord guarantee that he'd never deal with hardship? Not at all. A good man obtaineth favor of the Lord. Favor of the Lord doesn't necessarily mean every day is going to be sunny, but it means eternity will be. Favor of the Lord doesn't mean that every day is going to be easy, but it means there's someone on my side. A good man obtains favor of the Lord, but a man of wicked devices will he condemn. Again, there's a moral responsibility here. How am I going about life? Am I using wicked devices, manipulation tactics? Am I the kind of person that's trying to twist and cajole to get my way? Remember what we mentioned in Proverbs 11:30? He that winneth souls is wise. There is a big difference between winning souls and suppressing souls, between converting souls and subverting souls. There's a difference between one that actually influences and one that uses wicked devices simply in order to get what he wants. Let's go ahead and move this forward. Proverbs 12:3. A man shall not be established by wickedness. Well, Scott, this looks like this is talking about morality. You know what, it does. But let's dig a little bit deeper. It's not just the idea of morality. A man's not going to be established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous shall not be removed. Established by wickedness. Question. What do we think the wickedness is being used to accomplish? A man will not be established by wickedness. What's the wickedness being utilized to do? What's the aim of his incorporation of wickedness? Build himself up. Because he's not going to be established, whereas that's exactly what he's trying to do. The very outcome that he seeks is the outcome that he is not going to attain. The flip side, the root of the righteous shall not be removed. There's a stability there. He's trying to build himself up. In what way? In terms of pride? Quite possibly. In terms of sensual pleasures? Quite possibly. In terms of material gain? Let's say most likely. We're not going to rule out the idea of he's trying to establish himself just in terms of pride so that he can look down his nose at others. In fact, that idea is going to be conveyed later in this chapter regarding the man that is lowly, but he hath the servant, is better than the one that exalts himself, but he doesn't have any bread to eat. Yes, it could be the case that the one that's using wickedness to establish himself is doing so to establish his superiority over others just in terms of his pride. Maybe he's trying to establish his inroads to whatever sensual pleasure he seeks. But by and large, the most obvious explanation, he's trying to establish himself materially. We have a material responsibility. And it's to pursue those things that we need, not by wickedness, but by righteousness. The root of the righteous shall not be moved. There's a stability for the righteous. So, intellectual responsibility, it pertains to my willingness to admit, hey, there's more to learn. To use a rational approach to what I claim to know instead of just going by my feelings, my gut instinct, or whether or not my nose is itching. We have a responsibility to follow after morality, to be good people and not to use wicked devices, verse 2. We have a responsibility to go about obtaining the physical needs in a way that's not pursuing wickedness, but following after righteous guidelines and standards. And then there's a stability. Verse 4. Let's call this domestic responsibility. This is the first passage in Proverbs that really hits on a warning about the one not to marry. And there will be others, but the idea conveyed is this. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. Well, that's an exhortation. That's a positive statement. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Why is this being said? Is this being said to the one that's already married, who doesn't realize he ought to be miserable, and telling them that he should be? The tone of Proverbs, my son, my son, my son. The counsel being given to the younger. Is there an application to be drawn from this for those that are already in marriages that are struggling? Absolutely. But the first and foremost application of this ought to be in terms of a discernment and looking for a mate. Proverbs 12 was one that was rather memorable in multiple ways for our family. We started going through the book of Proverbs a chapter a day. I guess it's been 12 years ago now. And at one point, we'd use the King James, we'd use the New King James. One of the reasons Proverbs 12 stood out is because when we went through this chapter in the English Standard, boy, the boys were much younger, and they just giggled when they heard the word stupid coming right off the pages of Scripture. They thought it was hilarious. But another reason it stood out is because in bringing up our young people, especially as they're entering into those teenage years, and they start to realize that the other gender doesn't have cooties. And we want to give them counsel about whom to seek. The book of Proverbs is filled with exhortations just to that regard. And now some would say, well, Scott, it gives great advice about who a young man ought to seek. I don't think that's a fair assessment. Matter of fact, it gives even more thorough advice as to what kind of man a young woman ought to seek. Because whereas the book of Proverbs might be addressed to my son, the qualities that Proverbs endorses and the attributes that Proverbs condemns in a man, in what he wants to be, ought to serve as perfect parameters for what a young lady should be trying to find in a husband. Thus, the grand bulk of the book of Proverbs can serve as a guide for the kind of woman that the kind of man that she wants to find, and the kind of man that young man ought to be. And then every so often, there's a warning for the kind of woman she ought not want to be, and the one he ought not try to find, as well as those exhortations for the one that the young man needs to find and the young woman she ought to be. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. This is addressed to the student so that he can use a level of discernment. If he's already married, then he needs to use that discernment in leading his home and helping steer her toward being a virtuous woman that will be a crown to her husband, instead of being one that makes a shame and his rottenness in his bones. If he's not married, then there's a lesson he needs to learn, and he needs to learn it quick. If she is not conveying excellence before you tie the knot, don't expect it afterward. Much like we've exhorted our young ladies, listen, if he's not willing to worship and serve the Lord and be an upstanding Christian man before you get married, you can't count on him to do it afterward. Are there exceptions? Yes. And we thank God for them. We can tell firsthand stories of those who may have taken a long time to obey the gospel, but we all rejoice when they did, and we thank God for that. But when we're giving counsel to our young people about the kind of folks they're going to marry, we're not trying to lay down strict and hard, fast rules. What we're trying to do is give the kind of counsel that will help them make the wisest decisions they can make. And the counsel given here is going to be this. If she's not conveying excellence beforehand, don't expect it once there's a ring on the finger. And if she's the kind that makes ashamed beforehand, how's she making ashamed? The same way that she would be showing excellence, by her conduct, by her behavior. She that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. We don't have to look far to find examples of those who have not only been handicapped, but just completely crippled by the negative influence of a spouse. Now, we understand this goes both ways. Keeping it in the terms that are conveyed in Proverbs 12:4, we're talking about domestic responsibility. There's a responsibility for him to lead his home. And if she's one that maketh ashamed, then there's a responsibility for him to lead her out of that mode of behavior. Is that always possible? No. Is it sometimes possible but not done? Yeah. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. She's his glory. She's an honor to him. I'm blessed to fit the first part of this verse. I would submit to you that the Forest Hill congregation has been blessed for years to have had preachers who filled the pulpit whose wives fit the first part of that verse. And this is a verse that needs to be stressed to those who would be preachers, because there have been many whose works and efforts have been crippled because of wives who were less than excellent, and more along the latter part of this verse. But it's not just for preachers. Obviously, we could apply this to elders. There are reasons why elders and qualifications are given for those who would be the wives of elders and deacons. But it's really for everyone. She that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. The word translated rottenness connects to the idea of a worm just gnawing at wood, just eating him away, turning him into nothing, making him but a shell of a man, causing him to hang his head when he's in public, to feel helpless when he's at home. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. We often teach from Ephesians 5:33, therefore let every one of you in particular love his wife even as himself. The wife needs love, right? And the wife see that she reverence her husband. The husband needs respect. The greatest way for the wife to exhibit respect for her husband is going to be to behave in a way that indeed fits the characteristics of excellence as defined in Proverbs. For her just to say verbally, I respect you, and behave differently is going to be hypocritical at minimum. Now again, keep in mind that everything we say in the book of Proverbs can be applied to the kind of criteria someone ought to utilize in determining who am I going to marry. Whether we're talking about the fellow she's trying to find or the lady he's trying to find. The point we want to make here is this: there's a domestic responsibility. There's a domestic responsibility beforehand in terms of discerning, is this really the kind of life I want to have because of the wife that I'm choosing? And there's a domestic responsibility once the marriage is begun in terms of, is he going to lead? Now let's take these four ideas: the intellectual responsibility, the moral responsibility, the material responsibility, and the domestic responsibility. And whereas they are applications of these in the first four verses, let's move forward. Verses 4 through 12, we're going to look at this in terms of deeds. Verses 5 through 12, we'll look at this in terms of deeds. Verse 5, The thoughts of the righteous are right, but the counsels of the wicked are deceit. Well, thoughts tend toward behavior. Counsels are given in order to arrive at action. The thoughts of the righteous are right. That is, they look at what's tzaddik, what's fair and just. Actually the word translated right is mishpat. It's the word translated judgment elsewhere in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. That which is just, fair. The thoughts of the righteous are just or right. They're looking for what is fair and right. But the counsels, this word indicates a manipulation. It indicates a plotting. It indicates an arriving at a conclusion not based on a fair weighing of evidence, but in order to arrive at a predetermined outcome. The counsels of the wicked are deceit. In other words, they're going to use lies to accomplish whatever they want to accomplish. There's a moral responsibility mentioned here, and our actions are going to be a reflection of our plans and our thoughts. By the way, there's a thought that can be examined in connection to this regarding those that are uncertain as to whether they're going to carry out their plans. Remember how Judas is described at the beginning of John 13? The supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray him. Back in Matthew's account, there's the words are given concerning Judas that Satan entered into his heart, and he went and made the deal with the scribes and the Pharisees prior to the end of the week, prior to the Lord's Supper. And even at the beginning of the Lord's Supper, the devil has put into the heart of Judas to betray him. But in that supper, when Jesus says, "One of you will betray me," what does every apostle down to the man ask? Is it I? Is it I? Even Judas said, "Is it I?" Now we usually describe that as him just being what? A liar, right? He's just covering his tracks. He's trying to act like the others. Maybe. But go to John 13 for a second. Judas, as well as the others, are saying, "Is it I? Is it I?" Jesus would say to John, "It's the one to whom I shall give a sop, and when he's dipped it, I'll give a sop when I've dipped it." John 13:26. When he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. And after the sop, John 13:27, what's the description given? Satan entered into him. Entered into who? I thought he was already there. He'd already made his plan, right? You ever known someone that started making plans to reach a certain outcome, but he really wasn't sure if he was going to follow through with it? You ever done that? You ever been the teenager that you knew this was a situation where you probably shouldn't be, and there's probably going to be a temptation arrives, but you're putting yourself as close to the temptation as possible, and well, maybe I'll make the right choice, or maybe I won't. No, it's not just teens. There are those that do it at every stage of life. I wonder, you think he meant it? When he said, "Lord, is it I?" I can't guarantee it. But I wonder. Was he questioning, am I really going to follow through with this? Am I really going to do this? Take that thought back to Proverbs 12. Because the more I allow my mind to flirt with ideas, to tinker with possibilities, to examine potentials, the more likely I am to fail whenever the real temptation arises and it's time to make a decision. The thoughts of the righteous are right, but the counsels of the wicked are deceit. The way that I'm thinking ought to be focused on what's right and true and just. And if it's anything else, then when the moment of decision comes, it may well be that I've just been lying to myself. So there's a moral responsibility, verse 5. Verse 6, the words of the wicked are to lie in wait for blood. There's some debate about how this ought to be constructed. I don't think construction is a word, but how it ought to be constructed. The idea simply being this: the words of the wicked are plotting, and again, here's manipulation. They lie in wait for blood. Their goal, their aim, their entire motive is to bring about someone else's demise. But the mouth of the upright shall deliver them. The King James, the American Standard, the English Standard all convey it with the idea of the mouth of the upright will deliver the upright. And that may be the case. Can we think of instances where a person who used upright speech and behaved in a godly manner was able to get out of trouble because he behaved in a godly manner? Was able to escape a worse outcome because of an upright behavior? It's not hard to call to mind events where that's taken place. But it may well be the case that the point is this. Verse 6, the words of the wicked are to lie in wait for blood of others, but the mouth of the upright shall deliver them. That would be the others. The mouth of the upright isn't looking for the downfall of others like the wicked are doing. The mouth of the upright is looking to help others. Now, if that's the case, it's not just a matter of, am I looking for the way to benefit myself with my words? But am I looking for a way to benefit others who are in any danger? Whose well-being, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual, is at stake because of the plotting, the conniving, the manipulating, and the plans of those with ill intent. The words of the wicked are to lie in wait for blood. What they say to bring about someone else's demise, but the mouth of the upright shall deliver them. Verse 7, the wicked are overthrown and are not, but the house of the righteous shall stand. There's absolutely a moral consideration here. The wicked are the ones that are overthrown. That's going to connect to what was said back up in verse 3. A man shall not be established by wickedness. The wicked are overthrown and are not. When they're overthrown, they come to nothing. The idea of they're forgotten. But the house of the righteous shall stand. The word translated house conveys the idea of the physical edifice. Now, can it, like in our day, be symbolic of the inhabitants of the home, the family? Absolutely. But by and large, it would be better for us to take it in a broader sense in terms of it describing the overall well-being of the house and its inhabitants. The house of the righteous shall stand. It's going to last. It's going to endure. So there's a connection between moral responsibility and material responsibility. And if I want to do what's best in taking care of my family and looking after them, if I want to do what's best in leaving them something that's going to last, then it's going to be a matter of practicing integrity in my behaviors, in my acquisition of wealth and finance, but also in my behavior toward the world around me. That's really about all the time we have this evening. That bell's about to ring again, I do believe, if it hadn't already rang twice. Sometimes I miss it. But we'll pick up at Proverbs 12:8 when we meet next week. Thank you for your time this evening.